It's very early in the morning. The moon is still high in a black velvety sky. It's not even 5 a.m. But in Dave White's barn number 4 at the Indiana State Fairgrounds.
Oh, Lordy, we gotta get to work.
Activity is already well underway.
This mare's in the race tonight at Indiana Downs, so she gets hay in the mornings, so she can relax all day.
Dave and Suzanne White operate White's Racing Stable out of barn number 4, better known as Two Gates. Two Gates is one of 9 vintage horse barns at the fairgrounds.
First things first, the horses get taken care of. After they get taken care of, the cats get fed. and then we go back to working on the horses. The cats get fed because they can't catch mice.
On any given day, 365 days a year, between 150 and 200 horses, mostly harness racing horses, are boarded and cared for in these 9 buildings, affectionately nicknamed the Speed Barns. The horses get the training they need on the historic racetrack that stretches out to the west in front of the barns.
Well, we've been in this barn 22 years, and pretty much says it all right there. We kind of like it here.
These barns, rapidly approaching 100 years in age themselves, stand as rugged, solid, living, breathing testament to the proud tradition of Indiana harness racing, as old almost as the Hoosier state itself. Not everyone thought of the horse industry in the same way. In the 1990s, those responsible for the state fairgrounds tried to modernize many of the old facilities. One day, a bulldozer appeared at the horse barns. Horsemen, fair officials, and preservationists jumped into the fray, and a working compromise was developed.
And here we are. We're still going.
So many times an old barn doesn't get the chance these old barns got. When a barn gets old and is judged to have outlived its usefulness, it is all too often abandoned and falls into neglect. If it doesn't tumble down and collapse on its own, somebody helps it along with a bulldozer. And a part of who we are and where we came from goes away. But not always. Sometimes the old barns are spared, and through optimism, ingenuity, perseverance, and plain old hard work, they are brought back to life. A new, useful life. I'm Judy O'Bannon. Join us now as we celebrate the great things that can happen when we allow our old barns to have a second chance to be productive, a second chance to live again.
Generous support for this program is provided by the following.
This is a semi-sweet Traminette wine. This is from last year's harvest.
The feeling is warm and welcoming in the wine tasting room at John Richardson's Mallow Run Winery in Johnson County, just outside Bargersville. Now, that's worth picking, those grapes. Before it was a tasting room, this building was, you guessed it, a barn, built by John's great-great-grandfather, George Mallow, back in the 1870s.
This barn was one of the reasons that we decided to do the winery. My son had gotten interested in the business at that time, and we had this old barn that we thought would make a perfect tasting room, so we decided to do the barn renovation. This is a sparkling wine.
Our enjoyment of the wine here in the reconverted barn is the final step in a process that begins just outside these walls, in the Mallow Run Vineyard, where this year's harvest is in full swing. Show me how I cut these things, because I know you got to get them. cut it real close to the stem, huh? Right up there?
Mhm.
Oh, wait, here's a bigger thing. John Richardson has not always been in the wine business. Like his barn that became a tasting room, John started out in a different line of work. He taught English in the New Albany school system for 35 years.
After I retired from teaching, I saw an article saying that Indiana winemakers were wanting farmers to grow grapes. I thought that would be a neat thing to do in my retirement, move back to the family farm, throw a few vines in the ground and watch them grow. Little did I know how much hands-on effort is required to grow grapes. But then my son got interested and we decided let's open a winery.
Now, we're taking these off and we're putting them in this big thing, and so is everybody
You do
else.
it so well.
What happens after this?
From here they will go to the winery, they will go into a crusher, and then from there, from the crusher, they go into a press.
The juice from the pressed grapes is pumped into tanks for fermentation into wine. The wine is bottled, and it ends up back here in this barn that's now a tasting room, where if we're lucky, someone will pour a little more into our glass. Why do you save it? It would have been cheaper to put a pole barn up. Why didn't you?
In fact, one contractor said it'd be easier just to raise it. I said, but it would not be the same thing. This shows some continuity, some permanence.
Back in the vineyard, the volunteer harvesters express their joy in being a part of this gathering place in their community. Is it neat having this?
Oh, it's wonderful. And we work for wine. And when they put in the winery, it brought everybody in the community together. We've met so many new people.
Well, everybody's so friendly, and look at this. It's like heaven on earth.
And I think that's important, to make our customers feel that they are welcome and that they are doing something that is good for us, and that we are trying to do something that is good for them and the community.
You look around, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are really glad the barn George Mallow put up almost 150 years ago was built to last.
I've had people say, what would your ancestors think of this? And I said, well, I hope they would approve of what we've done to the building. And it's a continuity that I've always felt. Two barns?
Two barns and good people.
Very good, thank you.
Two of the good people I've gotten to know over the years are my barn buddies, Amos Schwartz and Rudy Christian. I've learned a lot from them, and I thought I might share a few of their words of wisdom with you.
I think it started with my mom. Mom always seen the good in people, and we was always taught to look at the good of people rather than the bad faults. And that is, that's the way I feel. I see these barns, houses, where the roofs are sagging down and stuff. But when I go in there, I don't look at the sag. I look what's the good portion of it. And a lot of these buildings get destroyed when they have so much value to them yet.
When you work with wood, when you fix up something that was broken or discarded, is there therapy in that for you?
Oh, there is, because you know what you're doing will be here for generations to come. And it's such a joy to see something get restored, that other people can enjoy it. There's so much in this world that isn't good, but there is a lot that is.
There's a whole lot that is.
It sure is.
That's something that young people have to have instilled in them. They need to know that they can do it.
They can do it if they have to.
They can do it. And that's something that I find is surprising to young people all the time. Whenever we bring them to a barn raising and we show them how these buildings are built, and we give them a chance to drive the pegs, and we put tools in their hand and we let them cut some of the joinery, they can't believe that they actually have the ability to build something. They never thought about it before. They have to understand that. To them, they think that all that's left is sitting in front of the computer. That's all they're good for. We need to change that.
It's not often I arrive anywhere in this kind of high style. This is Jerry Baker. This is Jerry's truck. And this is Jerry's barn. What's this now? This is
a Curtis Craft midget race car. If you look over your left shoulder, that picture on the wall, the black number 75, this is that very car.
Oh my! Jerry Baker is a metalsmith, a shaper of sheet metal. What Jerry does in his beautiful big red barn is restore the broken bodies and missing pieces of vintage automobiles. Are you in this picture?
I am. The orange car, 35.
This is you?
Is me.
Before Jerry's career took off restoring race cars, he actually had a pretty good career going, racing race cars.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much fun that is. That is it's really
That
fun.
is just fun,
It's really fun.
Is it scary?
Well, it can be scary if things go wrong.
Jerry's eventual shift in careers, away from racing and toward restoration, has led to some pretty stunning accomplishments, perhaps none more so than this one-of-a-kind magnesium-bodied 1935 Bugatti Type 57S torpedo competition that he and his colleague Tim Coffeen were hard at work on when we stopped by another day. You know, I truly enjoyed my ride in Jerry's truck, but I sure wouldn't mind a quick cruise around the countryside in that shiny silver Bugatti either.
The kind of cars I work on are not the same in basic ways as the cars that people drive today. They were all or largely handmade originally.
Jerry worked the same kind of magic on his barn that he works on the cars that pass through his barn.
I was naive enough to not understand how big a job was going to be.
It would have been easier to buy like a pole barn. Some guys got that up in 3 days and cleared it and leveled it, and you'd have come to work and you wouldn't have taken the... why do you squinch your face up?
You know, I've worked in metal buildings and I've worked in masonry buildings, and they're just buildings. You know, they don't have life, they don't give you anything, they're just shelter. Whereas a building that's has a life, has had a life, you know, the beams are wood, most of it's organic, so it's warmer. It's just a whole different equation altogether.
Now, what about this?
There were families here with kids, so they probably had chickens here, and the kids named it, hadn't passed their spelling test as well as they should have at the time, but I was so charmed by that, I just had to save it.
Turns out the barn still has livestock. There's Groucho, and Helly, and Rufus. They're what Jerry's wife Cindy calls little heartbeats.
Heartbeats are good for us. Cindy taught me that. Having a lot of little heartbeats around is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Very right about that.
Rufus and Helly are rescue dogs, but as Jerry sees it, they're not the only ones who've gotten a second chance around here.
This all did happen at a point in my life where I was making a big change. So I went from what I used to be to being the next person I was going to be. Allowed a lot of growth and a lot of new challenge and opportunity. The buildings ended up being saved. The cars that come here get to live on as well. It's a nice thing to put together that we all got saved around the same time, and that saving continues.
We all know that there are a lot of pieces of farming that are dirty and nasty and ugly, but there are also those pieces of farming that are beautiful. So I've tried to sort of stage those opportunities for people coming to a farm to see the beautiful pieces and try to maintain the ugly pieces a little bit more out of sight, but not invisible.
I just love talking to Fritz and Jane Kuntz. Fritz is a practicing plastic surgeon, and Jane has a degree in finance. But what they really like to talk about is their labor of love, Traders Point Creamery. An all-organic, grass-fed dairy tucked into the gently rolling hills of Traders Point, just northwest of Indianapolis.
This farm was part of my family as a dairy, and there weren't buildings here at that time. They just used it as pasture because they needed more pasture area.
The need for buildings to house Traders Point's herd of brown Swiss dairy cows, as well as the milk production facilities and a restaurant and retail store, sent Jane and Fritz off across the Indiana countryside in search of old barns.
Well, we were interested in reusing buildings because, as Fritz talked about, it's a little bit a part of the whole piece of history and farming and what people have known in the past. And we met our good friend Amos Schwartz through the Historic Landmarks group, and he took us shopping and showed us some wonderful structures that were actually going to be destroyed if they weren't going to be reused. So we thought, we need buildings, and we think this could work and people would enjoy it and appreciate it, and they have.
There's something about being on the grounds of the creamery, rubbing elbows with those old buildings, that opens you up to all sorts of insights about the need and potential of being connected.
To be able to reuse these facilities, I think is critically important to keep that heritage and that spirit going.
As people come to the farm, they're sort of caught up in this traditional value of the American family, that farms required an intact family in order to operate and manage. You couldn't operate a successful farm without every member being involved. So as you come back to this sort of historical perspective, it is a great opportunity to reintroduce family. In fact, almost every one of our events and every one of the pieces that we add to Traders Point is always thinking that our target audience is the family.
We actually have thousands of kids that come out here every year. We wanted the kids to be able to go into the milking parlor and see that milk comes from an animal and it's not just coming out of a grocery store, you know. So that's a big part of it. They can walk in our gardens and see how vegetables are raised, and we actually use those vegetables in our restaurants so they can see the whole cycle of how things are used. They can also see cheese and our products being made right here, so they can see the whole process of how the milk from the animal gets to the table.
The opportunity to connect with the core pieces of life, you know, plant management, animal management, that sort of caring and tending for the magic that, I always say that the magic that happens with photosynthesis, you know, the way that we get the energy from the sun and the plants are able to make material out of the sun, and then the animals are able to eat that material to sustain themselves and to make a product that then only we then can support ourselves with. If those three previous ingredients aren't present, we're screwed. You know, I mean, there is no way out. So we must protect that piece, the plant, the animal, the photosynthesis, the magic that creates life for us on Earth.
Jane and Fritz's respect for that magic is definitely paying off.
We're growing. We have our products are in great demand. There are more and more people that understand what you put in your body is really important, and they don't want it sprayed with chemicals, and they want it to be a pure, basic product that they knew about years ago.
So there's some of that, the way Grandma used to cook and Grandpa used to farm is a little bit about what is really necessary and sustainable for the future as well. So they were more on track than we thought.
Fritz and Jane's gentle efforts to nudge our frantic, hurried 21st century selves toward a more thoughtful, more down-to-earth, sustainable existence has caused them to reach out to their farming neighbors, and together they have formed the Traders Point Rural Historic District.
We were able to go through a very long process. It was a 3-year process to create a whole district, 2,500 acres, and this district will allow people to have a drive in the country without leaving the city almost. Now, that's not all we want to do, because we believe that just like this adaptive reuse of this barn, the adaptive reuse of these rural spaces could really help sort of be like an incubator for new businesses and help small businesses grow that are all interested in the environment and sustainable. So we consider this to be economic development in a very positive way in a rural setting. And you know, we put on an Oktoberfest every year that we ask people to help contribute to. We take all the gate receipts and we donate those proceeds to this rural district to help maintain it. We'd like to have trails. We'd like to be able to have ways that people can get out and enjoy the environment and can be connected to their neighbor and come back and find those core beliefs that these farming families have.
Often here in the United States, I explain our lack of interest in historical things as the result of being a relatively new country. I've called it the Go West Young Man syndrome. We've had the luxury of using something or someplace and moving on to new ground when it fits our whim. But recently, while traveling in China, I found that old farm villages had suffered the same neglect as our aging barns. They're in a country that venerates its ancestors and touts its long history of wisdom. Farmers were relocated from old homesteads to what was thought to be better housing because it was new. The old brick buildings were left to crumble beneath the weight of the elements, taking with them the stories of the lives and times and wisdom that came before. That's the downside to China's rush to become a consumer-driven economy. The market wants to sell you things, and you're expected to buy them, new things, forsaking the old and the revered. Here's a quick before and after.
When I was growing up, we stored seed corn in the barn, and we fed cattle in the barn. They could come in the barn and get out of the wind, and that's where their water was and so on.
The barn is still here, of course, on Tom Dole's family farm outside Thorntown, but it serves a different purpose now, since Tom and his wife Carrie began shifting away from corn and livestock production toward a new business venture back in 1985. Welcome to Dole's Tree Farm. That's tree as in Christmas tree.
And so we use it now, the barn, to store some of our pre-cut trees in. And every tree that comes out of the field or off the lot comes in front of the barn where we shake it. Our tree balers are inside, so the tree starts, comes up, gets shaken, gets baled, and then goes out behind the barn where the customers come by and pick it up.
As the Christmas tree business was taking root and growing, the barn received a complete makeover, structurally and cosmetically, thanks to a unique rescue effort headed up by a truly innovative and somewhat unexpected partnership.
It included Campbell's Soup Company and the Future Farmers of America alumni. As part of the renovation, Valspar Company also donated all the paint.
As part of Campbell's Soup's Help Grow Your Soup campaign, Tom's barn was one of only 5 barns chosen nationwide to receive a complete renovation.
There was 80 kids here one day and 100 kids here the next day, kids and adults, and it was like a home makeover. They were out there. There was groups out there painting siding. There were groups that were reconstructing parts that needed to be reconstructed. There was a stairway built going up into the haymow. There were windows installed. All the doors and hardware was rehung. There were 3 coats of paint put on.
Red.
That was part of the requirement by Campbell Soup Company in funding this project, was that it had to be Campbell Soup red and white.
Well,
it is, and it's the ideal ideal color.
It's a beautiful barn. What do you do in the barn now? During the holiday season, of course, Dole's Tree Farm is all about making you feel like you stepped across a magic threshold into the world of a Christmas card come to life. That keeps the barn busy for a month and a half or so each year. But what about the other 10.5 months? Well, it seems the barn has developed quite a reputation for being the place to go when you need to throw a party. Big events like weddings and receptions happen here all year long.
We've tried to make it very utilitarian for year-round use.
I asked Tom if he ever thought about the people who built this barn more than 100 years ago.
I have thought about that. If that guy who built that barn came and walked in the barn today, what would he think? And it's, you know, there's just a lot to think about.
I think he'd clap. I think he'd say thank you to you. I think he'd cry and they'd laugh. And thank God.
You may be right that he'd be thankful that it's at least still here and being used productively. When we can renovate and maintain and make it useful, then that's when it all comes together and it's a good thing.
Over the months that we filmed this program, I think what inspired me most was meeting the people whose lives are so connected to the second chances their barns received. Study the faces of these people. Look into their eyes, and what do you see? Joy, fulfillment, satisfaction. The English teacher who grows grapes and makes wine. The race car driver who brings race cars back to life. The surgeon and the financier who run a dairy farm together. The Hoosier farmer who brings us Christmas. The horseman who gets to remain a horseman. Again and again I witnessed it. Lives of enrichment and transformation. Lives with new meaning and purpose. And standing tall in the middle of each life is an old rugged barn that was not given up on. A barn that was not torn down. A barn that, like us all, if we're lucky, got a second chance to live again. Thanks for watching. I'm Judy O'Bannon.
Generous support for this program is provided by the following.